be presented to the Board of Finance later this month. So there are some similarities in this year's budget, and there are actually a lot of differences. My budget priorities will always be the same. I want to try to present with transparency to create trust. And in this particular budget, Martha and I, our business manager, have gone into much greater detail to break apart data that's reported to you as a Board of Ed and ultimately to the Board of Finance and to the town, so that everybody has the best possible understanding of a $22-23 million budget. So it's hard to put all that into one presentation, but we feel we've done a nice job being extremely transparent. The proposal that we're putting together is to provide the best for our learners. I think that, you know, as we are faced with this difficult task as a Board of Ed, and I know the Board of Finance and the town ultimately also have very difficult decisions deciding what they want to do, but one thing I've appreciated about Lebanon is we all kind of rally together and want what's best for our learners. We're going to continue to strive for excellence. There's been some data that we've shared during the year that shows that we have some pockets of real strengths, and we have areas that we need to grow. And in the budget proposal, we're asking for things that will help us strive for excellence. And we always have the lens of being as fiscally responsible as possible. And that's hard because running a school district, operating a school district is expensive. And we're going to highlight some of those increasing costs in this presentation. This is a reminder to all of you that you have a duty, a legislative requirement to provide adequate books, supplies, materials, equipment, staffing, facilities, technology, and equitably allocate those resources. Now, there's some subjective terms in there. You know, what is your interpretation of adequate? But you do have this legislative requirement as part of your voluntary role on the board. This is something that's also changed. The context of the budget, I have, for the past 3 years, had one of these bullets say that we are going to aim to maintain current staffing levels. Unfortunately, that is not the case this year. There are significant cuts to our staff across all 3 of the buildings, which I will outline. But there was no other way to come in at a number that was even close to fiscally responsible without making those cuts. We did try to align what we're asking for in the budget to our Board of Ed goal and to our LPS 2030 strategic plan. The current legislative requirements actually was a much smaller list this year, which was nice in terms of what we need to implement as a result of that legislation. Here's our mission, which you're all well aware of, so I'm going to move through that. As well, we've talked a lot about our new strategic plan during the course of the year. This slide, though, does highlight what our goals are within the strategic plan and what those correspond to in terms of related need. So if we want to offer college and career-oriented courses and programmings, then we need to have a robust program of studies. And in order to implement that robust program of studies, you need a certain level of staffing. You also want to provide small class sizes where appropriate to be able to dive deep into a very challenging curriculum. So that's just one example. And you all now have this most recent version of this budget presentation. I shared it this afternoon. You also have at your setting paper copy, and this is something that I will make available to the town if and when you make a decision on whether or not you want to approve it. So this is a good starting point. Our historical town-approved budgets, you can see over the last 5 years, the average percent increase that was ultimately moved forward and approved through the Board of Finance and the town has been a 2.74. And I will highlight that the past 2 years in particular have been higher than I can remember ever in Lebanon. And I'm thankful to the community, to the Board of Finance, the Board of Ed, for their support. Making the decision to go with a number at that increase is not easy. And I know that it was potentially hard on the townspeople, and that's, when you go back to thinking about our Board of Ed goals specifically around the budget, it talks about balancing the needs of the schools with our community, and that's what we're always trying to do. Moving on, this is just a snippet of the email that was sent out from the Board of Finance that kind of shaped the context of where we are and what we're trying to do. We were asked to come in as close to current fiscal year spending levels as possible. That is a near impossible task. And I plan to highlight that in this presentation and also show what we did to try to accommodate this request. The next 5 to 6 slides are things that, just in case you haven't been listening closely on the news, and I admit I don't always listen to the news, there's not a bunch of positive things being shared, but there has been a significant amount of time dedicated to funding specifically in education, special education funding, and the impacts that it has within schools. In the governor's proposal, there's been conversation about incentivizing districts that are operating special education programs that are at a cost savings. So I just kind of threw some of those things in there with some of the representatives' feelings on how this should be supported at the state level and what we could be doing differently with the budget. There is a video clip in here from the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, where one of their members is discussing some of the challenges with budgets. Just some survey data that shows that of 400 registered voters, 72% said that education funding should be prioritized in the state budget, and 53% said that they'd actually support tax increases along with that. This is the Connecticut Association of Board of Education legislative priorities. So they're looking to increase the ECS foundation and fully fund excess costs and commit state funding to enable districts to support the need for counselors and mental health staff. The Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendent also has legislative proposal highlights, and they are very much the same. There's that alignment. Talked about the governor's legislative proposal and the support for special education in particular. This is something that's new and different, so I wanted to have its own slide. So we recently had our school resource officer retire, and we're thankful for Officer Solonsky's service. The school resource officer was supervised and monitored by the town through an MOU that they had. We have had conversations with the town about transitioning to a different model where we have armed security officers, which would have all of the same requirements and training, except they would not have arrest power. That would allow the responsibility for funding to come to the Board of Ed side, and then we would have direct supervision over that staff member. We've also talked about, in this potential shift, to change the model to have 2 armed security officers instead of 1 school resource officer, but using the same pot, for lack of a better term, money. So this is monies that were already budgeted for this current year on the town side, and we would assume that if we didn't take on this responsibility with armed security officers, that the SRO model would still be funded on the town side. But that will have a 0.32% impact on our overall number, just something for you to remember. This is about Lebanon, only Lebanon. But it is interesting to know what's happening in other districts, because I, as a superintendent for one, would be even more concerned with proposing increase along the lines of what I'm bringing forth tonight if the proposal in Lebanon was the highest proposal in the state, highest proposal in the region. That's not the case. Now, these are at all different levels. Some have presented to the Board of Ed and been accepted. Some are just superintendent proposals, and this is only a small snippet. So now, if you had the entire Connecticut spreadsheet, you're going to find ones that are lower than this, but you're also going to find ones that are higher. I tried to grab ones that are regionally close to us and similar in size. 7.3, 6.9, 5.75, 5.46, 12, 8.7, 8.14. So when I saw our number and then looked at what's happening in other towns, it didn't make me feel any better. It just made me feel not alone. So now we start diving into some of the figures. So I have been a superintendent that has given directive to our administrative team and then to the teachers to say, ask for what you think you need. Don't shy away from asking for what you feel you need for our students. I don't want you to have a deficit mentality of we're not going to get it anyway, so we're not going to ask. So under my leadership, the requests have been greater. But I trust our teachers that what they're asking for, they need. I trust our administrators. That being said, when they brought their request that led to a 9.86% increase, I looked directly at our leadership team and I said, that's not going to happen. And I worked with Martha in the business department, and I started proposing cut after cut after cut to her, and she would give me a new figure every time I went down. I was able to get it to a 6.23% increase. And then, in the 2 weeks before I made the presentation, we had a change in special ed transportation. Mr. Jarvis was informed that we had mandatory sprinkler inspections that were another $50,000, and we had other salary considerations that bumped us up to a 6.42. That 6.23 was hard to get to, and there were some very difficult decisions, including staffing cuts that were proposed. I have not yet gone back and attempted to cut down that 6.42. So some bottom line statements here. Salaries, benefits, and other contractual fixed costs make up 5.92 of the overall 6.42%. Why I think so many other districts are in very similar positions to Lebanon is insurance. Our cap is at 11% increase. Just reminding you of some historical moves that we've made to save money, to be fiscally responsible. We were in the state partnership plan. The claim history was not good to Lebanon, but we were in this large group, so we had to take the rate increases they got. We moved into a small block where we had smaller districts who had similar claim histories, and we were able to save a significant amount of money. But in that small block, it was not sustainable. And our broker kind of told us that, like, hey, you're going to have to make a move. You can move now, or you can wait. We chose to move now with an understanding that our cap would be 11. It's proven to be a good move because those who didn't move, their rate increase cap is at 13, and some even higher. But that makes up 2.12% of a budget increase, 2.12% just to have health benefits for our staff. I went as far as to ask Martha, and this is not a realistic option. I want you to know that, but I also wanted you to know that our supplies and materials make up a very, very small amount of our budget. I asked Martha, I said, no supplies in any classroom. Now, all of those requests are cut. $350,000. Just over 1%. So here's just a bar graph that demonstrates a lot of what I was just telling you. So employee salaries and benefits, we got the, over $900,000. Other contractual fixed services, 400,000, etc. You could follow this along. And now I talked about some of the differences this year. In previous years, I gave this large number of money, and then I gave some graphs that showed it. This year, we went into much deeper detail so that you can have a more transparent understanding of what's really going on. Before I get to those deeper dives, here's some of the areas that were examined for potential savings. So we are at this point in the budget presentation proposing that there is an equivalent to 6 full-time positions being reduced. 3 regular education teaching positions, a special education teaching position, a paraeducator position, and a custodian. We are also in the 3rd year of our early retirement incentive that saved us money each of the past 3 years, which I'll show you on the next slide. And we have a significant reduction of requested services and supplies. So not only did I cut from the new requests that would have been above and beyond what we currently have, I cut departments and grade levels and individual teachers to pre-pandemic levels in many cases. So between those cuts, we have about $1 million that were taken off of the initial requests. Here's the voluntary early retirement incentive. So we had teachers who had been teaching 30, 34, 35 years, and we were extremely grateful for their service, but they were continuing to teach. And from a financial perspective, it wasn't helping the district. They were still doing a great job in the classroom, but we offered them an incentive to move into retirement. And each year it's had over $100,000 savings when you think about what their top step salary would have been versus their replacement. Budget drivers. Here's that big pie chart I've talked to you about. Blue is salary and benefits. Red, contractual fixed services and transportation costs. And then you have all of the other things. Instructional supplies, textbooks, workbook, technology, student-based activities. Here's the deeper dive that we've done. All right, so this just gets at the increase. When we look here, this is the total. So we're telling you that it's over $18.5 million for salaries. But what's most important for the budget proposal is what's the increase? So for certified staff, the increase was over $190,000. Other certified roles like stipends for coaching and advising was another almost $10,000. Non-certified staff, over $180,000. I say all those things, but they pale in comparison to the increase for health insurance. The health insurance increase was almost $500,000. That's more than the increase in salary and benefits, salaries for all of those identified positions. I took it a step further so that you would know a breakdown of those salaries by bargaining unit. Because some might say, well, why are we giving them that much money anyway? We operate under contracts in our bargaining units. So the administrators in this year are 3.25%. I know there's been comment about what the inflation percentage is. 3.25 for administrators. Teachers, towards the end of their contract, their percentages went down. They're a 2% increase. Our paraeducators did get a 4.5 in their most recent round of negotiations. Their salary or pay was under what is considered to be the minimum living wage salary in Connecticut. So we had to make an improvement there. Our custodians, a 2.5% increase. Secretaries were in a very similar position to our paraeducators to make their positions competitive regionally and to bring their living wage up. They got a 5%. The unaffiliateds are all different. We've recently gone through that, so I did not list them all. And the armed security officer is on there again, just to bring your attention to it. We went as far as to try to break down transportation and all other operation costs. So transportation, these are our contract with M&J to have our number of buses picking up and dropping off our students. It also includes some special education transportation for students who need specialized vehicles or who are outplaced in other facilities. And we're responsible for fueling those buses and paying for the gas for other vehicles and machinery in our district. Operations, we outline our repair and maintenance of equipment in district, our repair and maintenance of the building. So we have MCOR as a service provider, comes out and looks at our boilers and our furnaces. That's just one example of all the other contracted services that are there. Our rentals, so that we can have a copier machine and printers in our schools. Our custodial supplies. Continuing on, postage, student insurance, dues and fees, etc. The one I will draw your attention to, tuition for outplaced students, is over $1.3 million. That's for students who we cannot provide that level of service in our district. I want you to try to hold on to that number because we're going to have a whole breakout of the changing landscape in Lebanon and a specific snapshot on special education. But total operations is over $3.2 million. The district staff report. I've referenced the cuts we're planning to make. Here's a snapshot of our district staffing over the past 4 years. Number of administrators has stayed the same. The number of certified teachers has increased, and that is in direct relationship to the increase in special education. And I'm going to talk to you about something called maintenance of effort. It's something that we have to report to the federal government to maintain grant funding for many of these positions. Our paraeducator numbers have increased directly in line with the individual education plans. Our unaffiliated support staff has decreased. Our administrative assistant staff has stayed the same. Our nursing staff has stayed the same. Our custodial staff has stayed the same. The next couple slides just talk about where a lot of our current funding is going and where it will continue to go. We've added a school day pre-K classroom, which is a revenue generating program. We have a lot of professional development that is legislatively required that we are offering to our teachers. You'll remember all of the work we did around the early reading program. There's follow-up training that has to go there, around the phonics, around iReady mathematics. All of these things you should remember have been initiatives that were legislatively required in the past years and require follow-up professional development and funding. Some of the great things that are happening at the middle school with the AI tools and the acquisition of the grant from the State Department of Education. Some of the things that we talked about with SmartPass and a movement to digital 504s. And then at the high school, our new reading structure that has been provided by our English department. They've made extensive presentations around that. That's something that's on here. The 3D mapping program for the drone pilot course, if you remember a couple years back, that was a new program. So all of these great advancements that we've made need to continue to be funded. Enrollment is something that over the years I have dedicated a lot of time to. This year I chose not to. We just went through a school study as a town. You've been given updates on that ad nauseum. This is just a quick snapshot of the district projections that do show, according to SLAM, that over the next years we will see an uptick in enrollment, along with the summary. This does break out the number of students that are from out of district as part of our ASTI program. And that's a breakout of students in our regular ed setting who come from sending school districts who do not have high schools that we have agreements with. All of these are revenue generating numbers. Class size, you made a decision not long ago that you wanted to continue to support small class sizes in our district. That was something that was talked about through the school study in terms of their projections, and that was something that you as a board decided you would stand behind. Just an interesting data point, nationwide, class sizes in terms of student-teacher ratios have shrunk post-pandemic. So they're saying roughly about 16 students per teacher across the nation. And we've talked about how much we value this close-knit environment that we have in our schools that allows us to develop community and important relationships with our students and our families, and really allows us to address the social emotional needs of our students. We have an entire dedicated section to special education services. Keep this data point in mind. Across the state, the percentage of total population of students that are identified with special education needs moved from 11 to 17%. And just in that 6% increase, it had a 20 to 30% impact on overall budgeting. 6% of students accounting for 20 to 30% of overall budget. Here's maintenance of effort, and I'll be vulnerable to remind you and admit that I did not have a great understanding of this, and I've worked alongside Martha. And every proposed cut I was making, she'd say, Andy, don't forget about maintenance of effort. So maintenance of effort is a piece of federal legislation that says you must spend at least the same amount of funds for the education of children with disabilities on a year-to-year basis, except if these 4 situations happen. So if we have a voluntary departure of a special education teacher, we can then cut spending. So if, imagine every special education teacher in our district stayed on staff, but I wanted to make reductions in staffing, I could not touch special education because we would be out of line of the maintenance of effort and it would impact our federal funding. You saw earlier that I am making a recommendation to cut special education teachers. That is in line with the retirement that we receive. So that is a voluntary departure. I crossed the next one out. We have not had a decrease in enrollment of special education learners. I'll share the data with you shortly. And the last 2 are termination of costly programming or costly expenditures. So for example, Andy's a student in our district. He has some significant medically fragile situations that require an LPN to be with him or to have specific devices to help him get transported through the school. And then Andy and his family move. Well, we don't need to continue to have an LPN on staff. We don't need to continue to have specialized equipment if Andy has moved. So then we could reduce. But this is near impossible to predict, and I've said this to you before, we're kind of living this now. Our operating budget this year is in a challenging position because we had students move in that we did not budget for. So we can't, in the same token, anticipate people will move. First of all, they would not allow you to do that in the maintenance of effort, but it would be extremely risky because if they don't move, then how are you going to provide their services? So here's that slide that demonstrates the changing landscape in Lebanon. In the year 2020, we had 153 students who had individual education plans. This year, 188. 35 more students with identified special education needs. Students who also need accommodations through the 504 process has dramatically increased. But we have been able, in our district, to actually decrease the number of students that need to be outplaced because we have grown internal programming through creative thought processes in the People Service Department and collaboration and support from our building principals, and ultimately the execution of our teachers to have our SEALS program, our SCALES program, our PASS Academy. So we still have a $1.3 million tuition bill because there are students who still could not be successful to the extent we would want them to be in our district because we can't provide that level of service. So they do go to outplacement facilities, and the transportation for them is around $350,000. Here's a better snapshot to take a peek at it. So 14 outplacements at an average cost outplacement tuition of $95,000. Transportation, another $39,000. This is probably the most important data point and slide in the entire presentation. We have 28 students who would have otherwise potentially been outplaced that because of our internal programming are able to stay in their home district, which is important to us, it's important to their families, and we're proud to be able to do it. But just imagine for a minute that we didn't have those programs. That would be an additional $1.7 million of tuition, a potential $1 million of transportation. So the district has realized the savings of close to $2.8, $2.9 million by doing that. So again, here's that statement, 11% of the total population statewide has moved to 17%. We're seeing that too. And here's a further breakdown of the special education costs, salaries for staff, services and supplies, tuition and transportation. This year alone, the dollar amount increase was $342,000 just for our special education population. And our special education programming as a whole takes up 21.6% of our overall budget. Operating budget, now we're going to transition to capital. You've already approved in a previous meeting the capital request, but I do want to take a quick look at what our historical requests have been versus what our approved amount has been. There have been years where we have asked for a significant amount of money to try to do some much needed projects, and we are grateful for what we got, but it has proven to not be enough, and we're starting to see some of those results in the school study, and I know there's a lot of work that's still being done as a town in terms of the direction we'll go with that information, but that's for our facilities. Similar to capital, not as drastic a difference in the requested versus approved amount, and athletics outlined here. So the information technology amount at $65,000, I do want to point out, recently it's been closer to 100, 110 that we've been getting approved. We're not even asking for close to that amount because we are mindful that we just received a lot of money from the town surplus and we put that to work. So we don't need the 110 anymore. That surplus money helped us catch up. So we are in a better position now so we can ask for less money. Athletics has been a $30,000 request. I've had difficult conversations with Mr. Elliott, who has a vision for where he'd like to take our athletic department, and had to tell him, no, this is not the year to ask for that. So we've come in at the $30,000 mark there. The facilities one is the one that does jump off the page as much different than the others. That is because we just added the 480, is it?
65.
465 for the track. So we had, I believe, approved something of 162,000, but we added the track in there. So that is something you will need to consider as well. So here we are with a slide that removes all of the other stepping stones and just gets you to the number that I'm proposing to you for your consideration tonight, which is a total percentage increase of 6.42%. And as a reminder, this is where that 6.42 comes from. 5.92% of that comes from salary and benefits, with 2.12 of that 5.92 just being insurance increase alone. Then we have a remaining, let's call it a 0.5%. So not even 0.1% of the budget increase has to do with instructional supplies. Barely over a 0.1% for technology and equipment capital, and even less for student-based activities. So we have really kept this a bare bones, for lack of a better term, presentation, understanding the large increase that came with salary and benefits, and I have been considerate of that, and that's why this year, for the first time, under my leadership, I have proposed such a significant cut to our staffing. Any questions on the operating or capital budgets?